Hi, my name is Courtney, and today I'm going to present our paper, Negotiating Experience and Communicating Information Through Abstract Metaphor. In HCI, we might typically think of metaphor, for instance, as the desktop metaphor, wherein computer processes are represented by maybe an icon that helps to describe its functionality with something from the real world. For instance, the bin on the computer desktop is used for the action of deleting files from the computer's memory, or through Windows icons, menus, and pointers, wherein selection tasks and grouping of information is done as it is maybe in the physical world through collections of items on a desk and openable and pointable menus. And these representations are really helpful in communicating information and aspects of processes and tasks in the digital world between the human and the non-human agents within the computer system. However, these one-to-one mappings of taking a digital process and representing it with a physical action from the real world do have limitations. For instance, meaning can actually be achieved without a real world reference, and this is sometimes often necessary. A funny example of this, for instance, is that younger computer users today still use the save icon as a floppy disk, although many of them have never seen a floppy disk in real life, and so do not actually have the association of the floppy disk as being a saving action or a file storage action, but rather have still been able to associate the meaning of saving with this icon. And then as well, there are a lot of abstract experiences that we have that actually have no real world reference in general. Such abstract experiences through different sensory communication are very hard to talk about. So we don't actually have a good way to represent these even within language. We might be limited by vocabulary or not have any physical representation of these experiences. And so they're often something that we understand internally or just through knowledge of our body. And in that sense, we all have a different experience and different backgrounds. So our understanding of these very abstract experiences are going to be very, very different from person to person, making them more difficult to talk about. However, humans are quite good at conveying experiences, and they do this through abstract metaphor. In this study, we explored this kind of abstract metaphor in the vocal lesson. And the voice lesson is a really, really interesting place to explore this because it relies a lot on individual internally sensory experiences of the body while singing. And the goal of a voice teacher in their lesson is to take their understanding of their body and their practice and get their students to actually produce their own actions with the desired result in terms of their sound or their behavior. This model provided by Dunbar-Wells in a vocal pedagogy context demonstrates that the teacher's metaphor is translated into sensory-based imagery, which then eventually results in physical adjustments and changes to the student's tone outcome or other aspects of their vocal behavior. So given that humans are quite good at communicating sensory experiences, for instance, in the voice lesson, we have a few research questions when it comes to metaphor in HCI. Number one, we explore how humans are able to use metaphor to reach mutual understanding, and we do this by exploring the voice lesson. And number two, we want to know how metaphor actually works to communicate subjective knowledge. Number three, we want to know how these elements of metaphor can be operationalized within HCI and communication, especially with non-humans. And number four, we want to know how metaphor can help to address individual knowledge. So the main contributions of our paper are that we will provide a model of metaphor translation between two agents, whether human or non-human. We expand on the concept of metaphor within HCI to include many different representations of information in different modalities. And then we show an application of our model to explain communicating an existing design and future paths that use this kind of information representation. Within our methodology, we worked with 12 voice teachers who were teaching in a variety of styles. And the first part of a study engaged with their imagery abilities through the Bucknell Auditory Imagery Scale and the Movement Information Questionnaire, with the goal of seeing, does a teacher's imagery ability impact why they choose certain metaphors? For instance, would a teacher with better ability to produce a visual image be expressing themselves more often through visual imagery or through visual metaphor? And then secondly, we use semi-structured interviews to talk about vocal fundamentals, how the teachers teach them and how they learn these fundamentals themselves. The fundamentals included supported breathing, body posturing, controlling tension in the body, and vocal resonance. The first thing we examined were those imagery abilities and whether or not they correlated with the metaphors that the teachers used. Using a Spearman's ranked correlation test, we found that there was no correlation between their metaphor abilities and why and the metaphors they used. So the why these metaphors are chosen must be due to some other reason. And to uncover this, we used a thematic analysis to look at the metaphors they used and their teaching strategies, and we examined how these metaphors work to convey knowledge. From this, we uncovered 4 key themes as to how the metaphors were functioning within the voice lesson and more broadly. We found that metaphor works because it relies on embodied experience rather than pre-existing or domain-specific knowledge. So we take knowledge that does not have any relevance to the voice lesson, for instance, comes from other life experience, and we then apply it to a very domain-specific knowledge. Metaphor works independently of language, and concepts can be expressed in many forms. So because the concepts are rooted in a higher level cognitive understanding, the actual language used to represent that understanding doesn't matter, as said by many of the teachers who were speaking English as a second language and in fact learned vocal pedagogy in their native language. Number 3, metaphor communicates only core components and limits unnecessary detail. And this is something that's chosen by the teacher as communicating agent to help students rely on their bodily understanding rather than details that might be sort of confounding or confusing. And finally, that metaphor uses intentional ambiguity by using references that can be interpreted individually to incorporate individual lived experience and knowledge and allow people to take their own approach to whatever that given instruction is. There are a lot of details on these metaphors and specific and often very funny metaphors that teachers use with their students. So please do view our paper to see some of that and maybe get a free voice lesson. In the end, with these themes, we come up with a model of metaphor communication as shown here. So on the left side, we have our communicating agent, in this case, a teacher. It could also be the computer system or an interaction device. And then on the right side, we have a receiving agent, in this case, a student. It could also be an end user of a computer system. So the 2 different colored bubbles represent their individual lived experiences and understanding. And in between, we reach an idea of mutual understanding. Metaphor negotiates information between the communicating and receiving agents using an abstract reference, wherein the communicating agent encodes their understanding into a metaphor based on whatever their lived experience is. It is then given to and decoded by the receiving agent or the student, who internalizes it into their own cognitive understanding relative to their own lived experience. This process, as you see, is happening in a cycle or a loop, and is flexible and iterative. It's manipulated by both parties, which makes it unique from how some other HCI or more traditional HCI methods of metaphor occur, wherein the human agent or the receiving agent in this case is the only party responsible for understanding. Our model of metaphor communication can explain designs both inside and outside of academia. For instance, on the left-hand side in A, B, and C, we see bump top, which exactly mimics a real-world desktop environment. Our understanding of how to access documents doesn't come from the fact that they exist in real world or even visible forms, but rather that we understand that by clicking on objects, we can access them from a menu. And in fact, this kind of representation might limit all the potential of the desktop environment, wherein we can store thousands of digital documents compared to our real world desktops, wherein we can only store so much. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, we see an example of how a metaphor has changed over time and humans are still able to understand and interact with it. When an Android phone was first implemented, it included a physical button to access the menu. This physical button then changed to a digital button and then to an icon representation for the menu before disappearing completely and being replaced with a swiping gesture. So the metaphor for accessing the menu has changed over time. So the metaphor itself can be negotiated between designers as the phone's design changes and the end users who do still understand that there is a menu that can be accessed from the bottom of the screen. Our model of metaphor communication, and indeed the expansion of metaphor beyond just icons and symbols, can explain how projects such as the Heart Sounds Bench are able to communicate information about people using auditory metaphors. This is a good example of ambiguity in metaphor communication, wherein, because we all have a different association with heartbeats in our life from sociocultural applications, we're able to understand aspects about other people just by listening to their heartbeat sound without providing any sort of objective data about the heart itself. We've created a model of abstract metaphor communication, which can be applied to a vast variety of metaphors and explain why they might work in human to human and also human and non-human communication. We work with human agents and look at how their knowledge of an instance of subjective body-based communication within the voice lesson can be applied to working with non-human agents. We reflect on communication roles and the expansion of metaphor as a concept within HCI. And finally, we provide the beginning of a framework to evaluate metaphor and communication in design. Thanks for your attention, and we look forward to getting in touch with you about metaphor communication and other projects wherein metaphor might be useful.